Z from Zombies Clock Time 2. First Contacts. Author's note, this narrative is fictional, and any resemblance to the wonderful reality is a sweet coincidence. First Contact, Zombies in San Antonio, Texas. Special Agent John Colson, the night in San Antonio was hot and tense. I had been chasing Selena Smith, the international jewel thief, for weeks. Finally, he had cornered her in an abandoned warehouse near the river. Selena with her green eyes challenged me as I handcuffed her. "You don't know what you're up against, Colson." "John Colson, I know more than you think, Smith." But before I could say anything else, the shouting began outside. The gunshots echoed in the streets. Cars were crashing, and people were running in all directions. But it wasn't just the gunfire and the crashes that worried us. They were the figures that emerged from the shadows, the zombies. "What the hell is going on?" Selena asked. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here." I took my weapon and dragged Selena towards the exit. The zombies were in the streets, their eyes lifeless, their clothes blood-stained. "How is it possible that they give so much to the zombie drug?" Selena asked. "The posters spread an addictive poison, Smith. There's too much money at stake, and this is the result." The sirens of the patrols mingled with the sound of gunfire and screams. The zombies advanced, hungry and ruthless. Our first encounter with the zombies in San Antonio. On an afternoon when I should have brought Selena Smith to justice, but to survive we ended up fleeing together to the south, until we found other survivors in an abandoned country hotel called the Good Rose, where I continued to pursue Selena more intimately. First Contact, Zombies in Jerusalem. The perspective of a volunteer from the International Red Cross. When I arrived at the International Red Cross Operations Center in Jerusalem, my red and white vest identified me as a volunteer. The city, with its millennia-old history and religious significance, had always been a place of tensions. But what we were facing now surpassed any previous conflict. Ruth, beside me, Ruth, an experienced nurse, was reviewing the lists of the injured. "Have you heard the rumors, Daniel?" I nodded. "Rumors about what, Ruth?" "Zombie drugs, Daniel." "Zombies?" I looked through the windows of the operations center. We received several injured individuals arriving on stretchers, and some who came walking, some with bites, others with gunshot wounds. It wasn't just the zombies we feared. "Doesn't this ever stop?" "Morphine, Daniel?" Ruth asked me. After an explosion, the lights flickered in the medical care rooms. The cries of the wounded mingled with the sirens of the ambulances. My first contact with zombies in Jerusalem. On a day that couldn't have been worse, I became a volunteer for the Red Cross, continuing the day carrying a hot rifle in a city of angels and demons. First Contact, Cairo. I am Naur. I adjusted my gas mask and looked at a mirror through the fogged-up lenses. Cairo, my beloved city, now lay in silence. The streets, once filled with laughter and the sense of spices, were littered with debris. The buildings, with their wrought iron balconies, rose like monuments to desolation. Amira, with his tangled hair and dark eyes, Amir scanned the surroundings. "Do you think this was the work of the fans?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the dust. I nodded. "The rumors say that it was a failure at the old Al-Azhar. A virus." My gaze fell on the nearby mosque, now in ruins. "Here is our entrance." We moved towards the entrance, dodging decomposing corpses. The zombies, once our neighbors and friends, were now hungry and grotesque creatures. I remembered my grandfather's stories about the jinn and their curses. In the building's lobby, we found dusty files and broken monitors. Amira connected her old phone to a damaged terminal. "Corruption. Cover up. Here is the truth," he announced. "First Contact, battlefield in Ukraine. My uniform is stained with mud and blood. The war has left scars on my soul and on my skin. But today, near Chernobyl, we face something darker than human enemies. Yulia, by my side, Yulia, a combat doctor with tired but determined eyes, holds her flashlight. Zombies, he murmurs. Are you serious, Victor? Seed. The reports are clear. Something came out of the old nuclear laboratory. A virus. Now, the fallen soldiers rise again, hungry for flesh. How did we get to this? How did we go from war to fighting against the undead? Yulia asked. Negligence, corruption, and stupidity, Yulia. The same selfishness that led us to war. There is much that we do not understand, and now we are paying the price. We walked among the ruins of tanks and collapsed buildings. The zombies crawl, their tattered uniforms, their lifeless eyes. They are not like in the movies, they don't moan or run. They are silent, relentless. What do we do now, Victor? Survive, Yulia. First contact, Moscow. I walk through the deserted streets of Moscow. Red Square, once filled with tourists and flags, is now a silent battlefield. The historic buildings are marked by fire and decay. Next to me, Irina holds her AK-74. Zombies, Nikolai. Nikolai, I agree. The dead rise, hungry for flesh. How, Nikolai? Irina asked. How did we go from war to fighting against the undead? Corruption, Irina. The same corruption that led us to war. The scientists toyed with forces they did not understand. Now we are paying the consequences, the price. In Red Square, we dodged decomposing corpses. Zombies, once citizens, are now grotesque creatures. They don't run or chase, they simply lurk. We continue towards the shelter. Kasia and Pyotr, first contact. It was a normal day. The sun filtered through the leaves of the trees as we walked along the cobblestone streets of Krakow. Pyotr and I had been neighbors since childhood, and our routines intertwined like family threads. He, the history enthusiast, always had a book under his arm. I, the lover of cozy cafes, never left without my reusable cup. Kasia, have you read about the legend of the Vodal Dragon? Pyotr pointed to the castle in the distance. They say that the dragon lived in a cave beneath the hill. Can you imagine? I laughed. Pyotr, that's just a story for tourists. But yes, I can imagine the dragon having coffee on the terrace. Our conversation came to an abrupt halt when we heard a moan. No, it wasn't the sound of a tired tourist. It was something darker, more visceral. Pyotr asked, what is that? I looked towards the corner of the street. A man, or what was left of him, was crawling towards us. Her skin was pale, her eyes lifeless. Pyotr, that's not normal. A drunk. A sick person. But when the man stood up, his teeth bared and hungry, we knew the truth. He wasn't a drunk. He was not a sick person. It was something out of a nightmare. Zombie. I shouted, and Pyotr and I ran towards the nearest cafe. We took refuge behind the counter, looking out the window as more zombies appeared and wandered down the street. How can it be real? I don't know, Kasia, but we have to avoid being seen, like the Vodal dragon in its cave. Thus began our first contact with the ZS. On a day that should have been normal, we became the protagonists of our own legendary story. First contact, chaos at the school of Paris. The sun was shining over the schoolyard in Paris. The children were laughing and running, and I, as a teacher, was trying to maintain order. But that day, everything changed. Camille, next to me, Camille, a 13-year-old girl with eyes full of rage, lunged at me. Her teeth bit into my arm, and the pain was unbearable. But it was she who moaned. The blood was oozing from my wound as I struggled to contain it. Camille, what are you doing? But it wasn't just a tantrum. Camille was not the same. His eyes were empty, and his skin was paling. She wasn't an angry girl, she was something worse. She growled and bit me again. I fell to the ground, dazed. The other children were shouting and running. Some also displayed the same behaviors. What's happening? The authorities arrived quickly. They took me to an ambulance while Camille was being restrained. What's wrong with him/her? I asked. Probably rabies, said the doctor. And me? You got bitten. We need to apply rabies treatment. The members of that medical staff were the following victims. First contact, Barcelona. I woke up with the light on and the aroma of coffee floating in from the kitchen. A normal day, I thought. But something was out of place. My roommate, Luisa, walked into my room with dark circles under her eyes. Have you seen the news, Jordi? I yawned and rubbed my eyes. News? What news? I just woke up. What's going on? It seems there was a party with zombie drug, Jordi. There are zombies in the streets. I sat up in bed, confused. Zombies, like in the movies. They say a virus has spread. The dead are rising, and they are real, Jordi. We went out to the balcony. The streets that used to be filled with tourists and locals were now deserted. The zombies wandered, their eyes lifeless, their clothes filthy. Let's see what we do, Luisa. On a day that should have been normal, we became survivors in situations that defy all logic. First contact, awakening in the zombie apocalypse at Mexico City Airport. Eve, the sun was just peeking over the horizon when I arrived at the airport. My flight was scheduled to depart early, and the security routine and boarding seemed normal. But something was out of place. It seems like your message is incomplete. Could you please provide more context or details? Beside me, Alex, a retired pilot, looked at me. Have you heard the rumors, Eve? I looked at him/her. Rumors. What's happening? Zombie drug, Eve. Intoxicated with fentanyl on the tracks. The situation is getting serious. I looked through the airport windows. The planes were motionless, and human figures were staggering across the runways. They weren't lost passengers, it was something very bad. Alex. They say that a virus spread from an international flight. The dead are rising, and it's real, Eve. The emergency lights began to flash. The alarms rang out at the airport. And I thought it was going to be a normal day. First contact zombie Islam. Rio de Janeiro. The heat beat down on the narrow alleys of the favela in Rio. The streets were filled with sun and shadows, reality, as always, harsh and ruthless. The favelas, with their stacked houses and inhabitants struggling to survive, were a world apart. Beside me, Isabella, with restless eyes and dark skin and hair, looked at me with determination. Lucas, have you heard the rumors? I nodded. Yes. I looked through the narrowness of the alleys. The children weren't playing, they were crawling, their eyes lifeless, their clothes ragged, just like before, but with more blood. The thin curtains flickered in the tin houses. The bullets whistled through the air. The BOPE squad, the military police of special operations, was advancing through the narrow streets. But it wasn't just the zombies we feared. We face more dangers, Lucas, the undead and the corrupt living. Politicians, drug traffickers, all fighting for power in this hell. Thus began our first contact with the zombies in the favelas of Rio. While the majority perished amidst false hopes, we became survivors where the line between life and death blurred. First zombie contact. Vatican City. I arrived at St. Peter's Square in the Vatican City. My trip to Rome had been a dream come true, and a Nordic tourist sweetening my nights. And the anticipation of seeing St. Peter's Basilica and the Vatican museums filled me with excitement. And nothing could go wrong. Helga, beside me, Helga, a tourist with restless eyes and blonde hair, looked at me. Is it Moro? What's happening? Silence in the streets. Isn't it strange? I looked across the square. The pilgrims and tourists who used to fill this place were now absent. Very strange. They said that a virus spread. But they were talking about the zombie drug, Moro. The emergency lights began to flash at St. Peter's Basilica. The frescoes and statues seemed to look at us with sadness. There was no one, the place seemed abandoned, only the gentle wind and the distant sound of birds. Better that we go back to the hotel, Moro. I'm getting scared. Some human figures swayed, staggering in the distance. Helga and I walked with a strange feeling of cold through the deserted streets.